Not only is it just a preferable place to our real life, but it's also just a necessary part of our real lives. If we don't have fantasies, then we have nowhere to experiment with all the situations that are just too dangerous to take part in. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Fantasy Matters. I originally was not planning on making this a series. I just had a video where I was going to talk about Final Fantasy, and then I started to realize that the next game that I was also playing was Under Night In-Birth, which is also quite fantasy related, and then I started to realize how much fantasy is a massive theme in all of the things that I do and all the things that I'm interested in, especially when it comes to comics, anime, video games, and all of this stuff. And so I figured it probably deserves to be its own video series because we could probably never stop talking about all the things that are related to fantasy. And actually, our very first topic is going to be a Disney movie. Now, the reason I've chosen Disney to be the first topic for Fantasy Matters is actually because I was thinking about the show Chunibyo, and I was thinking about Under Night In-Birth and how emo it is. And if you've ever been through your emo phase, or maybe you're going through your emo phase right now, you may think that you're probably the only person going through it, but literally it's like something that happens to so many people around the world, where you start to reconsider what your understanding of your world is. It's a very simple place when you're a kid, and then you start to realize the world is like a much more complex place, and sometimes in many ways a much more dull and uninteresting place than you thought it was going to be. And you start to look for meaning in it, in other places. But for the most part, people tend to get through it. You know, they're like, okay, the world doesn't need to be as depressing and dark a place. And actually, we can kind of accept that the world is this hardworking place, and you're going to eventually have to fit yourself into society. And so that's why they call it like the emo phase. Eventually, you kind of come out of it. But there are certain elements of the emo phase that never really end. And I think those elements end up in fantasy. I think we allow fantasy to continue in our lives by playing video games or watching movies or getting into anime and manga and all these things that basically, if you allow them to control your life, you never leave the emo phase and you're just kind of this dark individual for the rest of your life. And hey, that's not really a problem. I'm just saying that it's probably not the most common thing that happens. And that's why I wanted to make an entire series about this, because Beauty and the Beast, even though it's only the first episode, when you think about the character of Belle, now you try to think about that song that she sings when she's running around in the fields, and it's all very Sound of Music-y, and it all sounds very nice and idyllic. But the subject matter of the lyrics are that Belle is completely unsatisfied with the world with which she's been presented. She is the daughter of this inventor, and the whole world sees her as this good-looking person who's a bit weird. And the movie is called Beauty and the Beast. It's all about how this beautiful person contrasts with this horrible, sort of ungenerous beast, prince, who becomes a beast. That's the main setting of the story, right? But I think when people think about the movie, they all think about how intelligent Belle is, how good looking she is, and how she is kind of like better than all the other people in the town, and she kind of sees the good in people. She's a real hero in that way. But when I think about the lyrics of the song, you know, not just the lyrics that Belle is singing and but also the lyrics that the people of the town are singing, really all they're focused on is what a weirdo Belle is. She's always reading books, and we thought of that as, okay, because Belle is more intelligent than everyone else in the town, and that's one reading of the story. But the way I see it, Belle is just the original Chunibyo. And again, going back to what is a Chunibyo, it's like quite a specific version of being emo, but in Japan, I think kind of around junior high school age, people they get shocked by just how tough their life is going to be in Japan, like how much they're going to have to work really, really hard. And if they want to survive properly, they're not just going to have to work like everyone else. They're going to have to work after work, overtime. They're going to have to do overtime. Overtime is going to be built into the work. Like when you actually apply for a job, it actually says, this is the working hours and these are the expected overtime hours that will be part of the job. It's almost like part of the contract is that you will be doing overtime. It's not overtime, it's just contractual that you will work way more hours than would normally be agreed to in many Western countries. And that's not to say that overtime is not a thing in Western countries as well, but I'm just saying that this is kind of the way that the culture has been built in Japan. So I think as part of the shock when junior high school students are being told about just how hard they're going to have to work to pass their exams in junior high school, and then how hard they're going to have to work to pass their exams in high school, and then if they don't get into a good university, then they're probably not going to have a good life. Like at this very early stage in their life, there's a huge amount of pressure when they don't even know who they are, and they're being told that these small decisions that you're making now are going to make or break you for the rest of your life. And I think when you're faced with the reality like that, your mind wants to delve further and further into escapist realities, especially fantasy. And so part of the reason I was thinking about this is because I'm so into this game right now called Under Night in Birth. And unlike a lot of fighting games, it incorporates every aspect of its game systems into the fact that it is emo, fantasy, chunibyo. The gauges on the bottom of the screen, usually when you play a game like Street Fighter, you have a little gauge, and when that gauge builds up, you can shoot more powerful fireballs, or you can do super combos. There's all sorts of extra stuff that you can do. But it's not really part of the lore. It's not like there's the special EX gauge and Ryu was empowered by the EX gauge and he was able to overthrow the dictator who is M. Bison with EX power. That's not how it is. Street Fighter has its own lore, but it's not to do with the actual like gauges on the screen, not as far as I'm aware. But this game, Under Night in Birth, literally every aspect of the game is not just an external thing and there's a separate story attached to it. It's like whatever you see on the screen is part of the story. The background is where the fights actually happen in the middle of the night when the voids come out. They're kind of like zombies. Those gauges at the bottom, that's energy. The voids are like feeding on that energy, but then if you feed on the energy as well, you have the potential to become a more powerful human called an in-birth, and if it goes wrong, you could become a zombie as well. And that energy is also used in a middle gauge in the center of the screen, and you're like playing tug of war with that energy. So when you fight other in-births, you also have to like vie for that power, which is kind of in the ether. It's in the sky somewhere. And that aspect of the game is what makes it particularly powerful as a fantasy, because it looks all the normal things around you, like concrete buildings and darkness because it's nighttime, and it's just dangerous in the middle of the night because you might get mugged by someone who's trying to take your wallet or whatever. Under Night is really chunibyo, and it's looking for more meaning than that. It can't just be like this. The world can't be this dull place without magical powers. There must be more. And it creates more by looking at the night being dangerous, because actually there are certain nights which are related to the movement of the moon every month. At one point when the voids will come out, it's constantly looking for more. There must be something more than this boring life. And that's exactly what is said in Beauty and the Beast. And the very first song, not obviously the opening prelude, but I'm talking about the first song that's actually sung by Belle and the people of the town. She says, there must be more to this provincial life, or there must be something more than this provincial life. She's not talking about the fact that she just thinks that people are boring and that everyone should be an inventor and that, she's really smart because she reads, but other people don't read. That's not what it is. Well, in my opinion, the fact that she reads is just a quirk. She likes reading, but there's probably other people in the town that like reading. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a successful bookstore. Like the guy is clearly not gone out of business, right? So other people are clearly reading as well. What's actually happened is that the choice of book that Belle has made to read, it's not like philosophy. She's not reading about mathematics and, architecture or physics. She's chosen romance novels. She's reading a book about Prince Charming and so the idea, I feel like it's this mistaken idea when we think about Beauty and the Beast, like Belle is just super intelligent and wow, she is here to show the villagers how dumb they all are. What's really happening is that Belle, like any other young person, has grown up and is now facing the reality. And especially being a woman, she has a particularly bleak view of her reality in that she doesn't have as much control over it, because it's still talking about a town where, men make all the decisions and they get to decide who they marry. And on Belle's side, she's not, she's afraid that she's not going to be able to choose who she marries. She wants to marry someone that she actually loves, a bit like she's read in these books about Prince Charming. You know, she wants to do more than just be someone's wife and to raise kids. She wants to have her own career and whatever it is she's interested in doing. So, of course, there are plenty of morals and other stories in Beauty and Beast that, you know, things like female empowerment and all that. But the way I like to think about Beauty and the Beast is that it's all in her mind. It's all a hallucination that she's made up, because the reality of her situation is that she won't have much choice over who she marries. She won't even have much choice over whether she has to get married. And then when she gets married, she won't have as much freedom to choose whether she can continue with her career or go into inventing stuff, a bit like her father, or to continue reading all the books that she likes. Because even, you know, when she meets Gaston, he picks up the book and he's just like, ugh, gross, why are you reading this drivel? Throws it on the floor or whatever he does. So the way I like to think of it is that Belle is kind of like the original Chunibyo, and she doesn't have anime and manga and games to lose herself in. She has books, romance novels, things like Prince Charming. What does she say in the movie? She's like, daring sword fights, magic spells, a prince in disguise, all of this stuff. And even though she knows it kind of doesn't really exist, she loses herself in the book. She goes to the fountain and she starts reading it. In fact, she actually reads the book to sheep. Sheep don't know English. She doesn't care. She's talking to the sheep now because she needs anyone who will understand her. And I believe that Belle goes on one of the original fantasies. She loses herself in this book so much that she imagines that she goes on an adventure. It's a boring provincial town, but maybe her father gets in trouble. She goes to rescue her father. She gets captured by the beast in exchange for the freedom of her father because she's the hero and she's doing the right thing because he's the one who raised her entire life. And she meets these staff of the castle, but they're not staff, they're actually enchanted objects. All of those boring things like candlesticks and wooden clocks, they've become characters, and they sound like French people, or they sound like posh British people, and they sound like all the fantasies that she's been reading about. It can't just be a coincidence that she loves fantasy and then she goes on exactly the same kind of fantasy that she's been reading about this whole time. And she completely loses herself in it. In fact, she has a happy ending, and if you haven't seen Beauty and the Beast, I won't tell you exactly what happens after it. But it's a classic sort of happy end story, and it's the sort of thing that Disney has always done really well. And, you know, even if it's not super realistic, that's not the point. Although fantasy is, in its way, its own kind of reality, it's the fact that it's a reality that's different to our reality that I think is really important. And I can't really go into full detail about it now, but I've been reading this book about the origin of human species, right? And it sounds to me like one of the main things that separated Homo sapiens from all the other kinds of humans that were around and all the other animals that were around. It sounds like one of the main powerful things that the human could do was imagine things that don't exist. They were able to use language to talk about things that couldn't be seen. Where animals can only point at something that's dangerous, like, yo, there's a T-Rex over there, humans could tell stories about it. They could go over to someone else and talk about a T-Rex that this person had never seen. I saw this monster with wild eyes and giant teeth, and it killed half of our army, and only half of us made it back, and it was like this, and it lives up on that mountain, and if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to bring the monster here, and it's going to eat you. You know, it's the beginning of government. It's the beginning of the control. It's the beginning of society. All these things. But who knows? That T-Rex may have never existed. But of course, it may have existed. And whether you believed people or not would decide whether you lived or died. And so basically, the ability to talk about things that may or may not exist, that control of language, is what made the Homo sapien the king of the species that came out on top, and is the one that is the human that you have come to know and understand today. And all of this came to me because I was thinking about the games I had been playing recently. Final Fantasy XIV, which is an online RPG. You go on the internet, you see other human characters, some of them not human characters, and you enjoy this fantasy reality, which is happening on a computer somewhere. It doesn't really exist, but when you're there, like, you actually enjoy the game more when you kind of believe that it is real. And the more that you believe it is real, the more it is real. It's like it doesn't even matter that it doesn't exist, because as long as it's in your mind, as long as it was imagined somewhere, as long as it became someone's reality, who's to say it doesn't exist? Are the things that exist only the things that you can hold and touch? Or are they all the experiences that you have in your mind, and who can tell you what does and didn't happen? They're massive philosophical questions, of course, and we can't answer them all here in this one video, but basically I wanted you all to know that's why this is going to be a series. Fantasy matters. We're going to talk about Final Fantasy, we're going to talk about video games, other video games, we're going to talk about fighting games, talk about movies. It's just this amazing power of the imagination, and it's the desire of the human to create all these fantasies, and what are the reasons why we do that. And I just find it so fascinating. Is it because we're trying to escape from our reality? Because if that's the case, then why is it every time we create a fantasy, why do we always make it as realistic as possible? And it's because it's like, it has to be realistic enough that it's believable, but different enough from our actual real life that we kind of prefer it to our real life. It becomes a place that we want to take part in. And the other main thing that I really want to talk about in future videos is the fact that not only is it just a preferable place to our real life, but it's also just a necessary part of our real lives. Because if we don't have fantasies, then we have nowhere to experiment with all the situations that are just too dangerous to take part in. I just think about movies like Iron Man. It's like, that's really heroic what he did, but I'm so glad I watched a movie about it, because if I had gone and actually got myself in a dangerous situation like Robert Downey Jr., what's his name in the movie? Tony Stark. If I had got myself in danger in a situation like Tony Stark and had to build a super robotic suit and fight my way back out and then decide what I would do with my company, which is actually building weapons, would I actually make the decision to make less money so that I could focus on more productive things that are morally correct, but, you know, don't make as much money as creating weapons? This is all stuff that I'm absolutely grateful that happened in a movie, so I don't have to go and experience making my own company and going through the same situation that he did. It's for this reason that I don't think fantasy is interesting. I don't think fantasy is preferable. I think fantasy matters. And that's why it's this series that I'd like to continue with you in the next few videos. That's all I've got today for this very first episode of Fantasy Matters, but now I want to know what you feel is your favorite form of fantasy. Is it video game fantasy, where you can go on and actually take part in something like an MMO, massively multiplayer, online RPG style game? Or is it watching it as a story in an anime? Or is it reading it in a story in a manga? Or is it watching it as a movie? Or is it creating fantasies of your own by playing role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games, where one person is the dungeon master and they're like telling a story and they're saying, you know, you're all in a dungeon, what do you do? Do you go north, south, east, or west? Do you fight the dinosaur, or do you run away from it? Did I say dinosaur? I meant dragon, but same difference. Maybe you actually write stories. Maybe you write novels. Are you a book writer? Would you like to be an author someday and get published for writing all of your fantasy novels? Like, he's just a boy who lives under a staircase, but he's going to go to this school of wizarding magic and he's going to ride a broom and he's going to point his stick at things. It's just such a fascinating topic, and I'm really, really excited about talking about it more in the future. If you're excited about going on this journey with me, then do, of course, subscribe to this channel by clicking the subscribe button. Obviously, if you can click on the notification bell as well, then you're more likely to get notifications of when new videos go up. I'm also streaming on Twitch. You can feel free to pop onto the stream when I'm playing Final Fantasy, or when I'm playing Under Night In-Birth, or when I'm playing any sort of game, and feel free to ask me questions and talk about this stuff, because I find this stuff really, really interesting. But above all else, it's not so much that fantasy is interesting or cool or preferable, it's that fantasy matters. I'll see you all in the next NihongoGamer video.